Okay, so let's get started. This video will discuss API.AI context. Recently, I was asked on my website, someone asked how to distinguish between intents which are more or less identical. And I had given a quick response, which is that you can use contexts to distinguish between identical intents. And then I remembered that I had done a recent an experiment on using context. So I thought that I'll just combine everything and create a video which also shows how these contexts would work. So what I have here is a test bot, just a test agent that I created, and you can see that it just has these two default intents which are always created for every agent that you create. So I'm going to start by creating an intent, and I'm going to call this, okay, yeah. So I'm going to call this intent I am standing, and the user says will be just I am standing, and I'm going to add a context. So I will add an output context which will get assigned, or which will be the context for the chatbot when this intent is triggered. And I just call it standing. I will make sure that the context lifespan is 1. I've talked about why choosing the lifespan of 1 is the best way to manage the state of your chatbot. It is, I would say that keeping the context at 1 is makes it easiest to analyze how your chatbot state um, is changing. The text response will be something like the bot just saying, okay, noted that you are standing. And let's go ahead and save that. Um, what I'll do is I will go to the integrations tab, and you can see that I've already enabled the web demo. So let's check that. And I'm going to open this tab over here. And the reason I do this is because it is much easier um, to refresh the page over here than to reset the context within the API.AI console, because sometimes that can be a bit unpredictable. So what I'll do now is I will just write I am standing, and it says okay, noted that you are standing, which is what we expect. So what I'll do now is I will create another intent, and I will call it you are standing, and here I will make the input context as standing, and I will not have an output context, and the user says will be what am I doing, and the text response will be you are standing. Let's go ahead and save that. So if you notice what I did, I have an intent here which says the user is telling the chatbot I'm standing, and that sets the context to be standing. And then you have another intent where if the input context is standing and the user asks what am I doing, then the bot should respond you are standing. Now let's go ahead and do the same for another action. Let's have it as talking, and the output context should be talking as before. Change the lifespan to 1. So I am talking, and it says, okay, noted that you are talking. Let's save it. Let's go to the intent list, create one more, and I will just call this you are talking. The context, in this case, the input context will be talking. I will not have an output context, and you can see that I am saying the same thing here. That is, the user says, "What am I doing?" As you might remember, I had the exact same user phrase in another intent. So these two intents are distinguished based on the context. So let's go ahead and finish this. It says you are talking. Let's go ahead and save this. So for now, what I have is a very simple agent, right? If we go to the test bot, I'm going to refresh the page. The context will be cleared. I'll say I am standing. Then it says, okay, notice that you're standing. Then I ask, what am I doing? Say you're standing. Then I change it to I am talking. It says, okay, noted that you're talking. So I ask, what am I doing? You're talking. So this is exactly as we expected. As we tell the action to the chatbot, it is going to set a context. And based on that context, when I ask, what am I doing? Even though the phrase, what am I doing, is the same, depending on what the context is, the context which is active, it is going to choose a different intent. In one case, it's going to choose you are standing intent, and the other case, it's going to choose you are talking intent. So I hope that till now it should be fairly straightforward. Okay, so what I'll do next is talk about multiple contexts. So how I'll do that is I'll create an intent and I'll say this is standing and talking, and here the output context will be standing, and I'll set two contexts effectively. Okay, and the user expression will be I am standing and talking. In a similar way, the bot should respond, okay, noted that you are standing and talking. Let's save it. Now I will add another intent. You are standing and talking, and here the input context will be standing as well as talking, and I will not have any output context. You will ask, what am I doing? And here the chatbot should say, you are standing and talking. So you can see that the chatbot's response is basically it's getting triggered by the context or contexts which are active. So let's see this in action. I'm going to refresh it. Let's say I am standing. It's okay, noted that you're standing. So you ask, what am I doing? It says you're standing. Then you say, I'm talking. What am I doing? And then now I'd say, I am standing and talking. So at this point, it has set both these contexts. So when you ask, what am I doing? It should say you are standing and talking. Again, this is pretty standard, just as you would expect. But actually, there are a few things going on under the hood, and it is important to remember these as you build out your chatbot. So the first thing is when you have an intent, like the one you are seeing here, which with the name of you are standing and talking, when you have an intent which has more than one context set as input, the intent will only get fired if both these contexts are actually active. And that's a very important thing to remember. So if you have an intent where you put multiple contexts, you will not be able to fire that intent unless you can make certain that all the contexts that you have set as its input are all active at the same time. So that's, I think that's still, till this point, I think this is still quite straightforward, right? So one thing that you can do to sort of like confirm that what I'm saying is actually true is you can move the you are standing. So I'm trying to temporarily delete these you are standing and you are talking intents, but I don't want to actually delete it because that will be like I don't want to type it all in again. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these two and I'm going to move it to another like a scratch pad agent I already created called testbot scratch, and let's go ahead and do that. So what happened now is that you have three intents which express the user's action. I am standing and talking, and then I am standing and talking. But you only have one intent which is for the bot's response. So in this case, let's go back to this test bot here. Let's say that I say I am standing. So you might remember that this will only set the context called standing. Also, since I make sure that all the contexts that I have declared have a lifespan of 1, I don't have to worry about any lingering context. So right now, there is just one context which is set, and that context is standing. If I were to ask, what am I doing? What do you expect should happen? So based on our understanding, we know that there is only one answer. There's only one answer intent, which can only be triggered if both standing and talking contexts have already been set. And since we don't have the talking context set, if I were to ask, what am I doing? So that's exactly what you expect. It should go to the default fallback intent because we don't have any intent which actually captures this specific scenario. All right, so I hope that that's clear. What happened here is that you can do the same thing with trying with I am talking also, right? So then if you ask what am I doing, yes, we are going to face the same issue because in this case the talking context has been set, and by now the standing context is already lifespan is 1, so by now it's already cleared. So there's only one context which is active, and that alone is not going to be enough to trigger the response intent that we have here called you are standing and talking. Okay, so that should be again that should also be somewhat straightforward, but I was going to show you one more thing which probably is not that simple. What I'm going to do here is I am going to take these intents and put them back to the test bot. So let's go to the test bot. All right. So here we are. We have all the we are back to the state we were in before we moved these intents to the Scratch bot. So here you can also try one more experiment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the you are standing and talking intent. You know what? Let me go ahead and delete it for now. I have a copy of it on the Scratch bot anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And there we go. It's deleted. So now let's go through. Let's just imagine what would happen if I were to say the following. So I'm going to say I am standing and talking. So it says, okay, noted that you're standing and talking, and that's what we expect. You can see that there is a text response which says, okay, noted that you're standing and talking, and you can also see that at this point, both standing and talking contexts have been set. Now, I don't have an intent which has both standing and talking as the input context anymore because I just deleted it, right? So the question now is, if I were to ask, what am I doing? What is the response that you would expect? So let's go ahead and do that. So you can see that it is actually coming back with you are talking. Now, um, so let's look at that intent. And you can see that in this case, if the talking context is set, this intent is getting fired, right? So what's happened here is when you have an intent, like for example here I am standing and talking, which sets multiple contexts. For example, standing and talking were both set, and you have another intent which or you trigger the intent which is supposed to call one of these. Suppose you have a user message which could call one of these intents. So here we have effectively we have two candidates, right? Like you have a candidate which is you can either trigger your standing or you can trigger your talking. And what really happens is that API.AI seems to randomly select one of these intents. Maybe it's not completely random. Maybe there is actually an algorithmic way in which it is deciding which intent it's going to use. And if anyone out there knows exactly how they do it, and if you can let me know in the feedback, I would really appreciate that. But the point here is when you have two intents which are both candidates to be triggered by the contexts which have been set, API.AI could choose either of them. That's one thing. And the other thing, which should be pretty clear by now, is that if there are multiple contexts which are set, in this case, both standing and talking contexts have been set. If there are multiple contexts which have been set, then every intent which has a subset of those contexts. Like for now, it's only two contexts. So every intent which has as input either standing or talking is now a viable. It's a viable intent which can actually be triggered, right? So whether or not it actually gets triggered also depends on the user's message and how close it is to what we have defined in the user says. But you might you can see that it should all these are still candidates to get triggered. All these intents are candidates to get triggered when you have multiple contexts which are set. So I'm going to summarize this again by saying that if you have, I just let's take a few seconds and move the you are standing and talking back into the test spot just so that I can have everything in one place. So let's go to the spot. All right. So when you have um, an intent which has multiple input contexts, then all those contexts need to be active for that intent to get triggered. That's number one. And the second takeaway is that if you set multiple contexts through an intent, like how you do here for standing and talking, that means every intent which has a subset of the multiple contexts that you have set as its input. Every intent which has a subset of the multiple contexts as its input is a potential candidate which could get triggered. And that is why, in this case, which we saw when we asked, what am I doing? It triggered you are talking. So one thing which I will also add, just as an aside here, is that suppose I had not deleted the you are standing and talking. So let's kind of go back to that scenario. I'm going to say I am standing talking. Says that. Then you say what am I doing? And you can see that it's chosen the you are standing and talking intent. And so API.AI is, it seems to be like having a sort of like a hierarchy, right? It's if you have multiple contexts and which are set, and there is actually an intent which has or requires both those contexts, or both, or even three or four, all the contexts to be set, it preferentially chooses the intent which has the highest number of contexts as its input in that case. So in this case, when you have both standing and talking set, it is choosing the intent which requires both of them. Um, Versus what happened when we deleted this you are standing and talking, where then it sort of went down that, like, so it checked to see is there an intent which requires both these contexts. And if I had deleted the you are standing and talking intent, it would not have found one which needed both. In which case, its fallback was to see if there was any intent which needed just one of those contexts to be set. So, in some ways, it is good that API.AI has like the strictest enforcement is the best option. It chooses it as the first option, and then it seems to cascade down to like looser enforcements of the context. But in any case, that would be like my third takeaway. So I hope that you got some good understanding of how the contexts work. And yeah, thanks for watching.